are live on the Facebook. Waiting a second for the YouTubes. Live on Facebook. Waiting a second for. And there's our feedback that we traditionally does, because for some reason I always have the sound on. All right. So good morning. We are live on the Facebook and the YouTube.
All right, good morning. Welcome to the 21st episode of Unifying Force. Kat, joined by Gio and David. How is everybody?
Hey, doing real well this morning.
All right, so we're going to start by, apparently there were some announcements for Celebration this past week.
No announcements? There was nothing.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything. What are you talking about?
Honestly, I don't know all the announcements because I haven't been following it that much.
So no, big announcements is, went ahead and there's more people announced for the guest list, and the autograph hall were announced. And I am not the person who keeps the detailed list and can tell you this and that. If you want to know more about that, you can join us tomorrow night for Celebrating Autographs with Frank Rich, because Frank is that person who knows everything and anything there is to know about which autographs and where they will be. So you can join us for that. But there were more autographs. The autograph hall opened for the autograph hall opened for pre-orders and stuff this week. So you can start looking and seeing who everybody is and what their prices are and that sort of thing. So check that out.
As I understand it, some of the time slots are already selling out. So if you're interested, you better act fast.
So the thing did happen this weekend, and so time slots are for certain people sold out, and then they added more. So they had initially apparently just put so many time slots out there. So a couple of people went ahead and did fill up, and then went back to open. But yeah, again, you can check in further for different episodes of our shows celebrating autographs, and we've been talking about this on Path of the Dark Saber as well. I know we'll talk about this Tuesday night in the virtual Cantina happy hour. So join us for any one of those if you want more specifics, because we don't roll with actual facts on this show. I mean,
Well, as far as facts that we can confirm, I believe they announced 2 of the main panels.
Yes, there have been a number of panels announced. Which ones are you calling main panels? The
ones they made it sound like the big ones. There's Mandalorian season 3 with Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni. That's going to be for Saturday, the 28th. And then there's the live action Star Wars projects panel, which is going to have, I guess, multiple directors for all the upcoming live action shows and possible live action movies. Maybe, I'm not sure on that, but that was one that was, I believe, for Thursday. I haven't heard what the other panels are that have been announced. Apparently,
there's Bad Batch panel, pretty sure that's been announced, I think, for Sunday. And I want to say that there is another large I think the one that I had heard of initially as the Kenobi panel is probably that live action projects that you're talking about.
Yeah, because with that dropping like the second day of Celebration, it'd be kind of, a moot point to drop a new trailer and another panel about that. So
yeah. All right. Well, I think we are here and we got some people watching this morning. So I think we're ready to delve into our main topic today. And we are going to be talking about another what if scenario. If you want to check out some other what ifs, we've mentioned that before in some other one. We had our major one was what if Qui-Gon had lived. We're going to be talking about today, what if Padme had lived? So spoiler alert, we're going to get into some things that happened. All right, so there are questions around exactly why Padme died. Did Padme die of sadness? Did Anakin, force choke her a little bit too hard? Well, the medical droids kind of say no. And then there is, of course, that I'm sure that we will deal with as part of this, the theory that to keep Anakin alive, somehow Darth Sidious managed to siphon her life force through the Force and into Anakin to keep Anakin alive and, in become Vader. So, but what we want to talk about and focus on today is how would the Star Wars universe, any and all parts of the Star Wars universe, how would it have been different had Padme survived?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because she puts her foot down pretty hard once she finds out that Obi-Wan's accusations are all true. She's like, I don't know you anymore. You're breaking my heart. You're going down a path I can't follow. She's completely stunned that everything's true. And so Anakin, of course, force stroking her because he feels that, he's done everything, all of this for her, and she's not responding well. So if she had actually lived, yeah, they can go hide somewhere. I take it she probably would not have gone back to Naboo, probably would have found some other place to hide out with the twins. But I would assume that because even though Vader is very abusive at this point, he would still be able to feel her connection with the Force or through the Force and be able to find her. I would assume she would be on the run for most of her life at that point, because if you add the component that Vader really wanted a family with her and kids, I think that would just be an extra driving force. Like he would hunt her down far more passionately than hunting down the Jedi Knights over time, So that creates a bit of a conundrum in terms of where she would have gone. I don't think she would have become evil because she seemed way too pure for that. Even at the end, when she has every right to hate him, she even insists for her last words to tell Obi-Wan that there's still good in him. I feel that. So I think that kind of speaks to her pureness and her ethicness, how ethical she is and a good person on the whole. So I don't know. I think it would have a greater effect on Vader and his doings and what he would be doing after Mustafar if she was still alive as opposed to her. Because the kids would also, in that case, have to be raised on the fly or on the run. And, that would obviously radically change them in terms of their worldviews and how they would grow up and change the saga as a whole. But it opens up a whole interesting can of worms for sure.
Lots of different alternatives. Gio?
Yeah, it's he already had an important role in sort of organizing and advocating for a different route for the Republic through the delegation of 2000. So there were some senators that were dissident with how the Clone War had been organized, and she was already coming about in a sort of leadership position within that. There were some really key scenes from Revenge of the Sith that were cut that involved some discussion, which kind of brought this more about to the fore, which are definitely worth tracking down and checking out. There were extras on the DVDs and Blu-rays and deleted scenes that really show that Padme had more of an active role in the shape of galactic events. And I think I do remember hearing that one of the sort of general criticisms of Revenge of the Sith's character stuff was how Padme seemed to be quite meek and passive and pretty much sidelined. But the kind of wider material definitely gives her more agency and shows that she would have had a more proactive role going forward had she lived. Yeah, I guess the most likely route I guess we could assume is that she would be on the run. She would be, number one target for the Empire itself as a oppositional leader, but then also the number one driving force behind Darth Vader's motivations to act, whether it would be kind of an open view of the Emperor and the Empire, or would it have been a more secretive mission that he found? That's the prime motivating fact of him going over to the dark side, being able to save his wife, to save Padme. So it would definitely be top of his list of objectives to find her and reunite his family. I do think that he was almost at the point of no return. So it would have been a case of more of what we saw at the end of Revenge of the Sith on Mustafar, very confrontational if they were to encounter each other again. I guess in the immediate aftermath of the birth of the Empire and the Revenge of the Sith events itself. But yeah, I think the evasion from the Empire would have been her sort of prime sort of storyline that she would have gone down had she lived. I think that's pretty fair to say. What do you think?
I mean, I agree with the both of you. There's so many options to explore because yes, the kids got away with flying under the radar because he did not know they existed. Maybe Vader felt some sort of feeling in the Force, you know, a familial kind of deal, but there was no way that for him to pick up on that. You know, he feels something, but he doesn't know what it is because he didn't know the kids existed. Padme, he's gonna know is existed, and he's gonna continue to feel that. I mean, she's one of the first things she is the first thing he asks about when he wakes up as Vader. And you know, Palpatine lies to him. Palpatine's lying to him a lot. But he's going to seek her out, and you know, can she hide? On the Outer Rim, does she end up that way? I don't know that the Force has these limitations on distance and where.
Well, it's kind of like in the original film when Vader goes into the hangar and he sees the Millennium Falcon sitting there, and he's like, I sense something, a presence I've not felt. You know, he can't put his finger on what it is, but Obi-Wan's been there, and it's like, okay. And then during the trench run, he senses that the Force is really strong in Luke, but he doesn't think there's a familial bond yet. It's not until he tasks Boba Fett and Chrysanthemum with, hey, find out who this guy is, and Boba Fett gives him the name, that he's like, oh, okay, you know. And then he had Aphra help conduct the investigation on Naboo and stuff. So if Padme had lived, given that she was starting like this rebellion in the Senate, yes, I could picture that she would perhaps be willing to pretend to play the role of the happy wife to Vader for the purposes of being incognito. But given Vader already knows she's against everything that he stands for at this point, I think he'd probably see through that ruse pretty quickly, especially since I imagine security measures during the Empire would be a lot tighter. No more secret, unofficial meetings. Like in Revenge of the Sith, the novel, they specify that when Palpatine gives his big speech to create the Empire, that she and a couple other senators wanted to say something, but their pods had been disabled, so they couldn't say anything, because Palpatine made sure that all the people who were going to be dissenters were not able to speak at that rally, and that they would be drowned out by all the applause and everything. I thought, oh, that's an interesting little extra layer they've added to it. So while it's true the rebellion remained like in hiding for a long time and the Empire couldn't find it, to your point that Vader didn't know his kids were alive, that's why he couldn't sense that Leia was there, because he didn't have any reason to think she was there. Whereas Padme was with them, I think he probably would have figured that out.
Right.
But then again, I don't think Padme would stay with the rebellion in that instance. Kind of like Luke in Return of the Jedi, where he's like, I can't stay here. My presence is jeopardizing the mission. And I think she would probably say the same thing. So
well, I kind of like what you mentioned really quickly there is, what if, you know, Padme had stayed with Vader and is running this like secret rebellion from, you know, from the inside, is, you know, because we've seen that Padme and Anakin's love surpasses a lot of things that Anakin did that, you know, most people are out, you know, not just the men, but the women and the children. Nope, most people out. Killing the younglings, still there, still trying to sense the good in him. So yeah,
that's a great point you just brought up. The fact that she was kind of fun. I mean, you could tell in Attack of the Clones, she kind of gives him the, oh God, look, when he mentions that he killed the women and the children, and she does the right thing. She calms him down because like, we can't have a big scene here. But then she freaks out a lot more at the prospect of him killing Jedi younglings. Oh, but the Sand people, oh, that's okay. And it's like, especially now that they've been humanized a lot more in the Mandalorian series, it makes it just it's like, I don't know, maybe Padme didn't know that the Tusken Raiders were a civilized society at the time, maybe.
So Lila's mentioning, you know, many of them, like a multiverse kind of theory with Marvel. Do we think there may be still a timeline that had she lived initially, would we eventually get to the point where Padme and Vader have to face off, you know, Are we going to see that, and then you'll leave Luke and Leia to hide out beyond that? How do we think that something like that could go down? Gio, why don't you start?
I think it would be it was something that I was sort of going along the lines of more of what we saw on Mustafar. So at this point, it would be a full-on confrontation that Padme, would be entirely kind of overpowered. And then it would be very much up to the remaining Skywalkers to bring about the rebellion as they grow up, even if they're still in hiding. I would assume that if they were to meet face to face, then Padme would know at this point, or she would have decided prior to the meeting that whether or not to even bring up the fact that a child, if not both children, had survived. She would still be very much of the minding of to hide them, to keep them away from the Empire's clutches and away from a Darth Vader that is completely succumbed to the dark side and sees no other way other than to kind of control and dominate and go about things the way the Emperor has prescribed. And so, yeah, it would. I think it would be a pretty grim ending for Padme to confront Anakin Vader again in the flesh, but she would still be motivated by the protection for her children and wanting to keep them as far away from Vader's grip and iron fist as possible, simply because if she goes about with the logic of seeing he's too far gone at this point, then his very young children aren't going to be able to exert any more influence than anything she could try and reason with or say to him. And if they were to meet, I don't think there would be a kind of way out for her. But yeah.
Now, see, Lila, I think it would be even more so than what Gio says. Is like, yes, if Padme confronted Vader, kind of on her own, could he bring himself to kill her? I don't know, but I don't think that would happen, because if Padme had lived with the children and she's going to confront Anakin Vader, I really think Obi-Wan would not be in hiding, to protect the children. Obi-Wan would be there standing directly in front of her. You'd get that Anakin Obi-Wan confrontation that we may see something again in the series. I don't think Yoda would have gone into hiding. I think you would have the two remaining Jedi Masters there protecting her.
Well, I don't think it would be a physical confrontation or a violent confrontation. I think it would be very much like the confrontation that Luke has with Vader on Endor, where he goes and he just wants to appeal to the fact that he believes he's still a good person, which of course is echoing Padme's final belief and final words as she was dying. And I think that's what he would do. She would try and do. But because Anakin had a past relationship with Padme, it would probably be a bit more of an intense conversation than the one Vader had with Luke. So I think it would be more along the lines of that. I don't think she would have it in her to want to actually kill him. Because even when, I assume C-3PO is the one who helps her onto the ship on Mustafar, and when Obi-Wan gets back from leaving Vader to burn to death, she asks, is Anakin all right? That's her first concern after he nearly killed her and her unborn kids. So I don't think she has it in her to want to violently confront him, but I do think she would want to, at some point, have that type of verbal, confrontation like the one Luke had on Endor.
I don't know. Padme's negotiations tended to involve blasters, and
that was also with some greedy Nemoidians and some duck-billed droids. So
that's true. Yeah, so I mean, there's tons of other options. Is Spencer's asking, do you think Padme would have been more of a head of the leader of the rebellion with Bail Organa?
Yeah, even if she wasn't physically present with them, wanting to make sure they were safe and away, I think she would still be a major player. Much like Leia rose through the ranks very quickly to become a major player. Because that's kind of the idea, that Leia is basically a reflection of Padme, or for the purposes of the writing of these films, Lucas, working backwards, decided, well, Leia's mother has to be just like her, just as headstrong, has to be wise beyond her years, and all of those same traits that he gave Padme that he had given Leia. So I think it would be very similar, and having, in that case, two of them, essentially, Padme and Leia in the rebellion, would be very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, perhaps it would have accelerated the formation of a cohesive whole of a rebel alliance that we saw in Rebels. That sort of organization would have happened a lot earlier, with Padme involved. The way that we saw the rebels kind of band together, Phoenix Squadron saving the crew of the Ghost, and the events that we see in the 4 seasons of Rebels, that sort of bringing together smaller splinter units to form a more cohesive whole, I think would have happened a lot earlier in the timeline of events to kind of defy the Empire. And perhaps you would have taken a sort of almost Ahsoka-ish role that we saw Ahsoka manage in the events and the stories in that series, just a little more forward in time, which then leads to, how would Ahsoka and Padme have interacted, because they did work together through a few arcs of the Clone Wars themselves. With there was the Blue Shadow virus incident. There were, attempts to assassinate Padme, where it was Ahsoka's trust that sort of enabled her to come through that situation. And then towards the very end, where Ahsoka felt, the processes of the Order had betrayed her in the wrong Jedi, it was Padme who was defending her at trial after she was being framed. So that relationship would have been a good one to explore, and can perhaps be something that we can think about, because that was a pretty strong friendship that wasn't really played much. Well, it had no existence on screen within the films, but within the Clone Wars was really something that was present there, if in a few of the kind of less popular story arcs, and would have been perhaps a big part of the Age of Empire sort of timeline and stories. I think Padme would have. So yeah, to summarize in a way, be a unifier of the little individual rebel units, and then also interact with key figures, as we've said, with Senator Bail Organa, and perhaps we would have seen more of Alderaan's forces mobilized, if they had sort of 2 key leaders. Maybe Bail could have been the sort of prominent one within what remained of the government, which the Empire kind of reformed and restructured, and Padme could have been more behind the scenes, just covertly acting to connect different individuals, different groups, to mobilize forces, to begin, taking back some of the freedom lost under the Empire.
Yeah, and Hunter is talking about how, he's thinking that, that her and Bale and the people still around in the government and supporting them, and then bringing in the remaining Jedi, is like I was kind of talking about, not just to protect them, but Padme wouldn't necessarily go out and seek them just for her sole protection. Padme is going to go and find Obi-Wan, and she's going to find Yoda, and she's going to find Ahsoka and say, hey, look, you don't need to be in hiding. You need to step up and do your part to end this evil empire. She's going to go and seek them to aid in the rebellion, not necessarily protect her and her children or whatnot.
I also think she would be the bridge between the rebels and Saw Gerrera, because she too led an insurrection against an invasion of her planet, so she knows what that's like and all that. And because she can empathize with Saw, even though she might not be as brutal as he is, I think she could do a much better job at brokering a partnership with him than the other rebels could, which would be another great asset.
Okay. Well, let's examine another possibility that we're going kind of a little bit the other way, is Lila's alluding to it here, is, the fear of losing it all would turn anyone, but she would like to romanticize that Anakin wanted a family and to find a way to be stronger, and the theme of love and family is stronger. So what happens if? Okay, little bit down the road, Padme has lived. Anakin finds this out even after, Sidious has lied to him and says he killed her or whatever. She's lived. Finds out. They find their way back. They meet. They have that hard conversation in private or whatever. Does Anakin kill Sidious for Padme and him to create? Now, she's not going to want to do it the way he wants to do it. He doesn't want to rule. But do they find that sort of way to where they're leading the galaxy together or moving it? What do we think?
Well, he had already teased that he was into the idea of dictatorships years earlier. And we know that he eventually, at some point, got the ambition to overthrow the Emperor and take his place, which he even tells her in Revenge on Mustafar. He's already thinking about it, and she can't even believe that he's that delusional, and his delusions of grandeur are just going out the window at this point. So I would bet that he would still want to do that. I don't think she would go with him, though, because she knows now from that conversation on Mustafar, this is what he wants to do. This is how far gone he is. Unless she were to lie and say like, oh yeah, we'll have a meeting and talk about this type of thing to, wink, wink, and set up an assassination. But I don't really picture her doing that, like leading the galaxy with him. But I do picture that he would be more than willing at the drop of a hat to kill Sidious for her.
See, I see a possibility going is kind of like you're saying, this the wink, wink, nudge, nudge is, I don't know exactly that I would say that Padme would be ruthless enough or cunning enough to use Anakin or use Vader, but maybe. But the enemy of my enemy is my friend is go ahead and it's a Padme Anakin team up, get Sidious out of the way. And that's only going to help the rebellion is, maybe Vader isn't powerful enough to do it on his own, but Vader with the resources that Padme would presumably be leading, Obi-Wan, Yoda, the Rebel Alliance. Sidious is gone. Now all you got to deal with is Vader.
Well, she has used herself as bait before. As Anakin said, it was her idea to bait the bounty hunters in Attack of the Clones. So she might be willing to use herself as bait again to lure in Vader.
Mm-hmm. Gio?
I mean, it's certainly possible, but I guess it's kind of difficult to sort of move aside from the sort of power level that we saw the Emperor and Darth Sidious to really have in terms of the Force, and so I do take what the proposition's being said, but it's hard to kind of go over the fact that the kind of insurmountable wall would have been the Emperor himself. Take him out of the equation, and the Empire kind of does begin to fall apart. But if that were the case, and let's say we extract Palpatine from the situation, then I think it would come down to, again, the kind of push and pull antagonism of, Vader saying, join me and rule the way that, I've always seen it, and that I've, tried to suggest to you, make things the way they wanted them to be, quicken the bureaucratic process to the point of removing it completely. And Padme would still be on much more the other side of the democratic way of doing things and negotiations and a more civil way of resolving things. So I still think it would kind of come back to that butting of heads again, and a philosophical and ethical difference between them is just maybe too large at this point to bring about some kind of reconciliation. But then again, I mean, would Vader have it in him to just seek to, force this kind of joint ruling, which would have just been a kind of mockery? It would have been him at the helm and taking Padme against her will. That's another sort of very grim, somber situation to imagine, but it's something that it has been seen before, in maybe in the much more the Old Republic timeline. We know that the Force can be used to kind of, unfortunately, manipulate people's minds. I would like to think that Padme's spirit and
Stronger than
constitution,
that.
just in terms of her ethical makeup, as we've mentioned, would be too strong. But there is that kind of much darker, more terrifying way of going around things that Vader perhaps could have utilized. But I think it kind of depends on where in the timeline that we are in that 19 years of the Empire. Perhaps initially there would have been more of a chance, perhaps, than later on, or we could go vice versa and say perhaps after years of Vader being Palpatine's enforcer, he's beginning to really reflect and reminisce on what he's lost even further. There's a lot of material that goes into exploring the psychology behind Vader and in the various Darth Vader graphic novel series that are ongoing. It seems that in terms of current canon, he was very much seeing the what ifs and the alternatives, and reflecting on the choices that he made, whether right or wrong, in the aftermath of the Sith. There's I think the Darth Vader 2017 comic series has fantastic stuff in terms of going into Vader's psychology and what it means to be a Sith, and could his choices have been different. And there's a fantastic kind of vision into the Force that Vader has that I don't really want to say too much about, because I thought it was such a fantastic way of looking at things visually that it's absolutely worth checking out if you haven't already, or if this sounds the kind of hypothetical alternate timeline type things interest you, and going kind of off the Padme situation a little bit here, but just into the realms of the Force, and what Anakin's identity remained, if at all, once he'd become Darth Vader, is examined in the latter part of that series, which is,
see, that's the thing that I think would be interesting to examine, and I have not read that material, so thank you for the no spoilers. But if the Anakin didn't exist, if there's no Anakin anymore, there's only Vader, at least until the end when Luke kind of brings them back. Would it have happened if Padme were still alive? Would the hope of being, even if it didn't happen, if she's hiding, she's running, she's wants nothing to do with him, would the hope of a reunification with Padme keep Anakin's soul, spirit, whatever, there, as opposed to letting Vader take over?
Oh, potentially, because I think that's why the Force kills her, because she needs to die at that point in the story, because the corrupt institution of the Jedi still needs to be fully dismantled by way of hunting down the rest of the old breed, so to speak. And that's only going to happen if Vader is in full-blown Vader mode and thinks Padme is gone and lost, because we see the whole Frankenstein's monster reaction that he has when Palpatine tells him. I mean, yeah, it's a lie when he says he killed her, but is it really? It's kind of like he killed her spirit and broke her spirit over that relationship. Like Obi-Wan says, you've done that yourself. So I think that, much like we talked about with if Qui-Gon had lived, the Force probably would have found a way to off him at some point anyway. And I think the same thing probably would have happened to Padme, unfortunately. And I think you're right, that if Padme had lived, that would have been some other guiding light, so to speak, for Vader to try and rein himself in a little bit. Because as we saw even on Mustafar, before Padme shows up, after Vader's killed the Separatist Council, he's standing there looking out at this grand landscape and he's crying, because he knows he's done terrible things. He knows he's crossed that line you're not supposed to cross, but he knows he's beyond the point of no return, which is further evidence that there's a bit of Anakin still in him. So I think that Vader being told that Padme's dead, that's like the coffin, that's like Vader's coffin slamming shut, but it ain't nailed shut, because Luke's gonna open it up later on, and bring him back, so to speak. So I think that's another. So I know fans, I kind of found it strange, honestly, that fans got so hung up on the whole thing. Oh, she died of a broken heart, what's going on? And I'm like, no, it's the Force. That's kind of the idea that's at play here, because the droids are like, yeah, she's medically healthy, we don't know what's wrong. So it's that.
the good take is better than dying of sadness. That's a better take than that.
But I do like the theory that Palpatine may have influenced the Force to kill her. I love that theory.
Yeah.
Just because you see that look on his face, that evil smile when Vader's having his breakdown, and it's like, oh man, that's Ian there.
Yeah. Or at least, the way I'm using my words is deceiving Anakin once again. He's right in the middle of the spider's web at that point. But yeah, I think the kind of speculative idea of Palpatine having a direct influence, or perhaps even Anakin in that transformative scene where he is becoming a cyborg and getting refitted and kind of reborn. There's always that shot that is kind of really comes to mind for me, at least, when you see the mask being lowered onto his face. It's the one moment you see of Hayden Christensen under that CGI or whatever, kind of look up, and you think this is the last time you'll see Anakin's human form for a long time. And perhaps at that moment, if Anakin is the chosen one with this kind of superpower that is explained but kind of isn't explained, and is very speculative from a kind of fan headcanon perspective, maybe Anakin had the ability to draw, using his emotional bond to Padme, inadvertently wanting to be so obsessed with her, and making it her existence his driving force, might have unfortunately taken the life essence from her. It's another idea that I think it is kind of fun to maybe say, as opposed to the clunky line that we have at Padme's end. But yeah, some kind of machinations of the dark side, meaning that Padme's end had to be there. It does make sense from the kind of story perspective, and from what we know of the way the narrative has panned out and explained the ways the Force has worked. Yeah,
and that kind of goes with the canon that they kind of alluded to for a minute and then backed off of it, which is, Palpatine had already was the one who had influenced the midichlorians to create Anakin for Anakin's birth. That was canon for like 5 minutes, and then they're like, no, that's not what we meant. But
yeah,
I thought it made sense. Let's examine another little possibility that literally just popped into my head while we were having this discussion. How you mentioned, Obi-Wan sitting there, they're rebuilding Vader. How does the battle on Mustafar go if Padme were a part of it? If Anakin hadn't force choked her out and Obi-Wan's there, but Padme is still a part of that or present during it, does the high ground happen? Does Obi-Wan having to protect Padme in some fashion?
You mean like if it were the other way around, Padme sneaking onto the ship behind Obi-Wan instead of Obi-Wan sneaking on behind Padme, kind of thing? Like
Anakin that way is that she's going there to confront him, or Obi-Wan's going there to confront him as he has to, and just like Padme pops in and interferes in this showdown.
Yeah, I don't know. She's not a Jedi. She doesn't have, at least in the film, she doesn't display any Force abilities. So I don't know if she'd be able to participate in the duel per se. She might want to. I wouldn't doubt that Obi-Wan would try and keep her out of it.
Well, that's what I'm kind of leading to, is that she's going to interfere and she's trying to get in there, whether she's trying to just, have a chat with Anakin and influence her. And Obi-Wan, does Obi-Wan get distracted? Does Anakin take over? Because you see, Obi-Wan is using absolutely everything in his power just to run defense and keep himself alive. If he's got to also protect Padme, either from Anakin, who probably isn't going to directly try and harm her, but has to like grab her with the force to keep her from falling in the lava as things are falling and this and that. And I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it would have at least changed the geography of their battle a little more. Perhaps I mean, of course, yeah. As you mentioned, Obi-Wan was just doing everything to deflect and stay alive for the huge majority of that battle. But perhaps there would have been a little bit more just verbal sparring between them, of which Padme would have stayed involved. But I think ultimately it would have come down to clash of sabers again. But yeah, it's interesting to think how the the dynamic might have been a little different, and trying to keep Padme alive and out of this. Would Anakin have been distracted a little more as well, with knowing, if they'd got to that stage where excuse me, the lava is rising and Mustafar station itself is kind of falling apart? Would that have meant maybe Obi-Wan could have caught Anakin off guard a little earlier? Maybe they didn't go cross as many get the quite mileage that we saw in that battle, and maybe Obi-Wan severs a limb earlier when Anakin's distracted trying to use the Force to keep Padme out. Yeah, it's
or the other possibility that maybe between the two of them they could have talked him down, and he was far gone. He was out there. He was there, but maybe it leads to his imprisonment as opposed to delimbing or whatnot. But all right, so I've been saving this one for a little bit, so I know. Bear with me. Let's go down the path. What happens if Padme's love for Anakin is strong enough? What happens to the kids? What happens to Luke, Leia? What happens to the galaxy? If, and I think we've already examined that it's a big if, and it's not an if that really would have happened. But what happens if Padme accepts Anakin's turn and they go forth with Anakin or Palpatine or their plan for ruling the galaxy? I mean, you get a Sith trained Luke and Leia at the side of Vader. Is Grandpa Sidious gets their training. I mean, whether they do away and what happens if to the rule of two at that point, because now there's 4 of them. I don't know.
I think Sidious would immediately try and get rid of them. I think he tolerates Vader because he views that after Vader gets mutilated in Mustafar, he doesn't pose as much of a threat to him anymore. Plus, he's still got Vader wrapped around his finger. But the kids and Padme, I don't know. I think he'd be feeling a bit outnumbered at that point, and he'd have a problem. And it's like he'd probably have to get rid of all 4 of them, because he'd know at that point that with Padme being what he used to manipulate Vader, he can't just, on the one hand, he can't let them live, but he can't just simply kill them either, because Vader would still turn on him. So it's like at that point, all 4 of them have to go, which means they would probably turn on Sidious, probably successfully, unless he kills them when they're children, which would probably make more sense. He wouldn't let them get to that point in their training or whatever.
Yeah, if things are kind of open and Sidious knows of all of their existences and they're initially accepted as part of the rule of the Empire, then it's either going to be out with the twins immediately and Padme, because she's the one crutch in which he really lent into to convince Anakin over to the dark side. And if that kind of dynamic isn't there for Palpatine to have manipulated Anakin, then his control of Anakin's weaker. So eliminating her and any vestiges left of his family and his more human life and not crooked and evil self would have been the go-to thing for Palpatine. And if they had survived, or perhaps, I guess, another alternative way of looking at things could be Palpatine might look at, he in The Empire Strikes Back, he was wanting to eliminate the Skywalker as a threat, but by Return of the Jedi, he's up for the idea of replacing Vader with the Son. I guess you could have looked at it as perhaps he sets up some kind of dynamic to keep them afar from Vader, and then when the time comes and he's sick of Vader being a little older and a little more broken, to then replace Vader with one of his offspring, and then continue things for as long as he could. That's kind of more in line with, I guess, what we see overall as the Sith, always just kind of looking to use whatever they can, organic or not, to maintain their own sense of power and preserve things. So perhaps that's a way it could have gone.
Yeah, it's kind of like in the story of the Trojan Wars, where it starts where I gotta go get Helen of Troy back. She, insulted me, cheated, whatever. But then the basic ambition and your own goals kind of supersedes that relatively quickly and drags a war out for 10 years over it. So yeah, when Anakin thought that Padme was dead and he didn't have children, I think he still had that ambition. It's like he's still, like he teased all those years ago at the picnic on Naboo, that he likes the idea of a dictatorship. I think he still would have pursued it, especially since we get that the reason Anakin wants a dictatorship is not because he's evil, but because him having grown up as a slave and then being able to leave Tatooine and see how life is different for so many people, realizing that things like this shouldn't be left up to a bunch of greedy, squabbling delegates as Palpatine sees it. It's like, this has to stop. And even though Palpatine very much endorses the idea of slavery and all this kind of stuff, if you read into the expanded universe, most of the horrible crimes of the Empire committed against those who oppose them, as opposed to those who are willing to join them. And so Vader, in that sense, it's like I think he would still be marching down that path, whether Padme was there or not. But I think if Padme was there, it would very much throw him off his equilibrium, so to speak.
So I think I kind of agree with Pierce over here in the chat. He's saying that he thinks that, Sidious would get rid of Padme and watch the twins very carefully and then groom the most powerful twin to replace Vader. I'm thinking, there's a possibility there that he immediately Dooku's Vader, takes Vader out, gone, done. And then you've got these infant twins who don't know, who you get them away from Padme, they don't know their father. We've seen that he's trying to groom a replacement. That's what he's doing with Rey. Is he wants someone to take that Sith power and move forward. So does he groom either both of the twins or one? Does he take Luke or Leia? Does he try and kidnap them both and he gets one and Padme lives and goes into hiding with the other? That's a whole other possibility and a whole different sequel trilogy that we could have had.
Well, you did mention earlier that the possibility that he would suck the life force out of one and give it to another, out of Padme and giving it to Vader. So maybe that's what he would do, identify which of the twins is going to be the more powerful and, literally suck the life force out of the other one to enhance the force powers of the other or something.
Yeah, or we get later on, we literally get the sequel trilogy, which is Luke and Leia being a dyad in the Force and feeling that draw to each other and that back and forth. The one was raised as the good, the one as the evil, is Rian Johnson, J.J. Abrams, why did you not call us? Because that's what should have gone down. But I think all of these are valid possibilities and things that could go out there. That's why I think this is such an interesting topic and way to go. But I think we've really examined that there's no real way that we see what the children's books want us to see, which is, little Luke, little Leia, and Daddy Vader having heartwarming moments. It doesn't go down that way. If Padme is with Vader, it's going to be as a possibly force brainwashed, mind washed zombie, or like we see in a lot of other traditional tales, like Princess Bride or Robin Hood, where the king, the leader, the prince is physically imprisoning that person. She's still got her opinions, and it's like, no, this is that, but you're physically locked away in the castle on Mustafar because I can't. So, but anything else? Any other takes on what happens? I mean, do we have? There is the potential. He knows the way. Can Vader raise Luke and Leia, and then they have the entire galaxy to themselves? I just don't know that the Force is going to allow that. I think a lot of what we're talking about just gets down to the will of the Force, and the will of the Force apparently is balance.
Yeah. That's my thought on it. They wouldn't allow Vader and his kids to rule the galaxy as father and son type thing. It's like, no, this is ending.
Yeah. Thought itself to restructure things enough at this point, and doesn't want any kind of wrenches in the cogs of the machine that's kind of been ticking along and going at this point. But I was almost going to ask, which planet would Padme, just on the very beginning of things, if she had survived, would have been safest on? Tatooine, Alderaan.
Spencer's mentioned that one over here in the comments already. It's like, does Padme take her family to a sand planet just to be safe away? But then again, he's also asking him over here is, does Padme become Lady Thor, and can she defeat Vader if she's got Mjolnir? Like,
now that would be amazing.
It's like this is battle. She picks up Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's killed. She picks up his lightsaber and she goes like this, but it's Thor's hammer instead of the lightsaber that comes to it. No, we're mixing our metaphors and treating Natalie Portman as Padme.
So that would work, because you would have her as Thor. You would have Vader in the place of actual Thor, then butting heads of who's going to be the leader. And you have Palpatine on the side as Gore the God Butcher, who's gotten rid of all the Jedi, is coming after them.
Oh, the things that they could possibly do when the mouse owns all the properties and
that's
could
right.
Put all of the things together.
But that's a topic for another time.
That is a topic for another time. That is another.
That's a new game, I think, for After Hours, mixing your genres.
Mixing your metaphors and your genres. We do that accidentally, I think, most of the time anyway.
Yeah.
So yes, Sherry, is Dooku and Maul were kind of existing at the same time. At the same time, he's grooming Anakin. So I think there's some fudge room on the rule of two and how that goes.
Because Palpatine didn't really consider Maul a Sith or an apprentice anymore after he failed him on Naboo, and he was kind of fine with him being out there doing whatever. It's only when he started threatening his endgame that he finally got involved and said, okay, we have to stop this. Kind of like when Dooku started getting a bit too close to Asajj Ventress, and that's when Palpatine steps in and is like, okay, get rid of her now. It's like, so he'll put up with that with a little bit, but if he feels that there's enough of a threat, it's over with. Like the whole Battle of Coruscant is orchestrated exclusively to get Anakin to kill Dooku, because that's what he wanted, to see if Anakin has it in him, to see if he could bait him into having that rage. So in that sense, I guess it's wiggle room, because in a sense, a Sith is more like a concept. Like for the longest time, Maul was just wallowing in self-pity, and even his quest to take down Obi-Wan was one that was mired in his own personal desire for revenge, but it wasn't really it wasn't until he started getting these ideas that, oh, maybe I could face my master again or whatever, that's when Palpatine finally was like, okay, I guess I gotta stop to this.
Right. Well, and then I think by the time everything goes down, and Maul is still alive even after Vader has taken the position of the second. So fuzzy on the rule of two. Do there have to be just two that are together, or who knows?
Yeah, especially with Maul going to Malachor and finding himself stranded there. You think Sidious would have found out somehow or sensed that. So, but there's still some gray area there because they haven't, at least to my knowledge, they have not explained how he ended up there and stranded. So that'd be fun stuff.
So super fun topic today. I have really enjoyed this. I think we've had a lot of talk, discussion, and there's room for more. But if anybody watching this, live now, or anybody watching this on the YouTube on the replay, if you've got suggestions either for other what ifs or any other of the range of topics that could be out there for us to explore on the Unifying Force, it's always fun to explore topics that are near and dear to the viewers. We'd love to do that. Please comment and let us know any other things. Final thoughts?
Summed it up. I think the Force killed her, and that it would find a way to do that anyway.
There we go. Gio?
Yeah. Anything to deflect from the not so fantastic little lines that we have here and there. It's always a nice little improvement, but yeah, in terms of story going forward, that it was the end of her kind of arc, but it's been fun to discuss, what role she would have played, and we do know that kind of retroactively, Lucas was, going back and I guess getting more character to the whole saga in terms of the soap opera of characters by having Padme be a sort of echo of what we saw Leia in essence in the original trilogy. But yeah, it's been a good fun discussion that we've had, and huge thanks to everyone who's been interacting and giving us little points to bounce off on, because that's always a real pleasure to have some more thoughts in and get our minds all bubbling up with this recipe of ideas that we can have in speculation and discussing these theories.
All right. And yes, Pierce, a little bit late, but you can go back and review what we've got and make comments on those videos, and we read those and check those out. And we will have those thoughts and those things ready for our next episode when we're on. So remember, if you're interested in news of Star Wars Celebration, is check out the main Facebook page. Always, we update as soon as new things come out. Check us out tomorrow on Celebrating Autographs with Frank Rich. There was sure to be much talk of those announcements and those autograph hall things that are out this week. And as always, you can join us for this live and in person and be with us on camera on Tuesday nights for the virtual Cantina happy hour, and learn more about Maul and the path to the Darksaber and all those sorts of things going Thursday with me, Jeff Spencer, and Mark Von Olen, when we will be examining, where did that Darksaber come from, who's had it, what's its significance going forward. So having said that, from me, Dave, from Catherine and Gio, thanks for joining us, and may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you all.
Force be with you all.
Happy Sunday.